Yeah, I was taking a little time to listen to your recent broadcast on 24/7 World Radio on the podcast you have there,
Hmm.
and I thought it was very interesting. Yeah, I'll start the record process here. Yeah, I just wanted to take a little time to catch up with you and our listeners, and I think that people are very interested in your perspective on what's really going on. And I see that just with the news headlines, things have really kind of, as was predicted, as kind of was like the blueprint and the roadmap. Things in California are kind of spiraling out of control. It's hard for me to imagine how things stayed in under control and how society stayed kind of intact because there was so much pressure on on people in different states, so much pressure on the society economically, and just with this influx of dangerous illegal invaders, as it turns out, into all the states, which obviously was part of this effort, this treasonous effort to collapse the United States, just with the force of so many people who have no culture, who are really just the muscle and the drug dealers for the cartels. And obviously, there's a lot of Chinese Communist Party apparatchiks that are here. A lot of we haven't seen this yet, but we can see that there's going to be a lot of terrorists, radical Sharia supremacists who are going to try to take advantage of this, I think, in California.
Well, I agree. Being a native of California, I was raised there, and it's a beautiful place. It was a beautiful place, and but it's the staging base for the West Coast invasion of the Red Chinese and the Russians. And so this happened over the last 10, 15 years is the deliberately softening up of the West Coast. I mean, Jesuit Coadjutor Michael Moore he talked about this in one of his documentaries and showed that the coastline of Oregon is policed by one police officer. So they've opened up the whole West Coast to weakening it, preparing it for its future invasion. And I maintain that will not happen until the Jesuits, their agents at the CDCs, released the plague on San Francisco and Los Angeles and other areas where they have all the homeless people. They're living in squalor and filth. And so the solution to this will be release the bubonic plague, and then that will justify their roundups and sending them to the FEMA camps. And that will further soften up the California staging base for the Red Chinese.
I think there's a lot of conjecture out there about the threats of this new technological warfare when it comes to biological weapons that are weaponized viruses. They obviously can advance the process of evolving and changing the actual biological shape and makeup of the virus really quickly through their labs. So they're able to find the ones that they can use, the useful ones, right? When they're basically gain of function viruses, the function that they're gaining ultimately is going to be how they can kill people or how they can shape them to target certain individuals. I think that's the next step here, is to have genetically modified pathogens that are going to just hit certain people groups. That's kind of their holy grail right now. And we're going through this incredible change on Earth, which is remarkable through the advanced cyberization, the cybernetics and the AI and the robotics are coming together to produce what they call the singularity. And I think you can see that we're going to go through this remarkable technological advance very quickly, very rapidly, and people aren't prepared for it, especially third world countries. Really, no one is really prepared for this kind of change that's going to hit.
Well, you mentioned the engineering of certain pathogens. I have an issue with viruses. I believe all we have is bacteria, parasites, and fungus. But nonetheless, they have engineered certain pathogens like the bubonic plague and others. But other pathogens that are created to target certain races of people And one of them that they have created is a plague or pathogen that targets Jews. Now, this was written in the form of a novel by Knight of Malta, Sean David Morton. I met him personally when I spoke at Conspiracy Con many years ago. And he gave me his book titled Black Seraph. And in that book, Black Seraph, they talk about a pathogen that is designed to kill the racial Jews. And so, many of the things that these men write, they want to appear to be a fiction, but it is most assuredly their design. So, Sean David Morton, Black Seraph, I recommend the listeners get that book.
Yeah, that's very interesting. We definitely are going to take a look at that. I think that this disruption, you can see the different kind of verticals that come together to bring about this kind of revolt that you're going to see. I think that we have so many illegal invaders, so this is going to be much more dramatic than the Black Lives Matter kind of.
Well, they'll work together. They'll work together. I mean, Jesuits run all factions, and so they'll orchestrate them together like they're the great composers that they are in music, so they compose in their political agitations. And to the end, remember, the end game is to drive all the whites into the new right. Betty Claremont, Catholics, Martin Lee, The Beast Reawakens. Those are the two classic works that your listeners need to read. That's where all of this is going. Donald Trump is the Jesuit master of the new right. He is their baby. They have prepared him for this. And Elon Musk made a terrible mistake when he went against Trump. And say he was at Epstein Island. He probably was, but he went against Trump. We're going to see now how Elon Musk is going to suffer terribly for this. Trump has banned the production of the Tesla in the United States now, which he really doesn't have that power, but he's going to do it anyway. And so Trump will come out of this better and more powerful than he was before. So the new right's being created. It's not going to go away. Anybody who seriously is a threat to it politically or effectively will be punished or eliminated by the Jesuit or CIA, NSA, and all the 16 intelligence communities in this country.
Yeah, I wondered what had happened with Trump and Musk, and I mean, there's really kind of an insider perspective here, and I'm aware that Stephen Miller, who I love Stephen Miller, is kind of like the architect behind the Make America Great Again movement. But apparently his wife, which I don't know anything about these people, but just from reading the headlines, his wife was working for Elon Musk now. So I wondered, how much of this is really just a limited hangout? How much of it is a mass distraction? I saw a unified effort across all of the conservative punditry to offer really salient and interesting arguments against why Trump could never really be on Epstein Island, etc. So I'm not sure if Trump ever went to Epstein Island or how he was associated with him. Maybe Trump, when he found out who Epstein really was, he went to war against him. Who knows? So ultimately, all that was exposed, and ultimately, all those people have to be protected. So, I mean, how much of it is really just a mass distraction? I mean, how much of it really brings about the question? It kind of opens up the question in the public of what happened with Trump and Epstein Island. It's no longer kind of like a question that's happening behind the scenes.
As you said, Sean, it's a distraction. Look what's happened to the people of power that went to Epstein Island. As that Jewish attorney for Harvard, what's his name again?
Dershowitz.
Dershowitz. Has anything happened to him?
Right.
Dershowitz went to Epstein Island and a host of others. Nothing's happened to any of these people that have gone there. So that's not the issue. The issue is Trump's connection to the Jesuits running New York and both political parties, and how he is really untouchable. He's untouchable, and anybody that seriously goes against him with power is going to be shut down. So it's the political power of the Jesuit order orchestrating things for the benefit of Trump. And I'll tell you this, there's no way that Trump could go to Saudi Arabia and be given the sword dance by those fanatical Muslim Freemasons without the backing of the Jesuit order that created Wahhabism and that controls Arabia and now Saudi Arabia since 1932. There's no way.
You know, it's interesting. You can see even when Donald Trump was out on the streets during 9/11 and talking, doing interviews, I found that to be the whole scenario was shocking. The whole issue with 9/11 was really just was breathtaking, and I think all America was put in an incredible. We were like in a state of shock, right? I think people were psychologically kind of damaged and or just really glued to their television sets in any case. And you can see that Donald Trump was out on the streets and he was talking to, and ever since then, I mean, I think he's been in the limelight. He's been in the media headlines. He's been kind of like sculpted and created. He's been curated to become the figure that he is in New York City. It's very strange because he was a Manhattan billionaire, and now he's the head of the Republican Party here.
Now, you don't have Trump coming to the power that he has without the total backing of the Archbishop of the political capital of the world, who is Timothy Cardinal Dolan in New York. It doesn't happen. It's impossible. And so the American people, because they have determined to act like children and to be more concerned with batting averages and basketball and women's basketball and all those children's activities, they keep them preoccupied so that they will never ask the real questions as who rules. Please solve for us the Kennedy assassination. By the way, Trump releasing those documents did nothing to further expose who really oversaw the Kennedy assassination, Francis Cardinal Spellman. And so it's all smoke and mirrors for the deluded and brainwashed American people, the conservatives, I mean the white people, watching Fox News, and more brainwashed there, who never blame the papacy for anything. So because the American people have decided that they enjoy games and pleasures and preoccupations and stories more than they want to hear the raw, naked truth, that is a judgment of the Lord upon us for the next stage that will further cause success with the new right, the quasi-new right.
No, I've just been consistent in my view that they're trying to create this and foment this kind of unnatural race war in this country between people groups, and I think that they're working hard at it. You can see that in the social media really does is it provokes people, and it provides this kind of really dark invective and this dark narrative, and you can show people the people that they want to really ultimately move and mobilize into these kind of groups. They're going to show them this imagery online, and they're doing it in a large scale. So you can see that you have these different Olympic athletes now. You have, which I'm not an expert on these people, but you have like the Simone Biles against the other girl who's the white girl, and they're arguing now, and so there's this kind of constant racial invective being brought across Hollywood.
Brother, yeah. It's constant anti-white, radical black hatred and invective against the whites. They started. You've got Stephen A. Smith, who's one of the most profane, invective, arrogant, majority savage blacks in this country. The space is everywhere. On every sportscaster, when I go to the gym, I have to look at that guy. I mean, he does nothing but aggravate and enrage white men. And that's what they want. So they use these blacks that are so given over to their emotions, and they don't think. And so they're perfect weaponized entities to be used against whites in general. I show they kill 10 white people a day. They rape 100 white women a day on average. That's a fact. I can prove it. And so this is what the white power structure was. But that's why they never report any black on white crime. Never. They'll report white on black crime every now and then when it happens, but never black on white crime. So this further enriches the white people, driving them into the new right. The blacks have been weaponized to attack the whites, to justify the whites going into the new right, led by certain Roman Catholics, and it will be joined by the Proud Boys and alt-right and all those other centers, so that the Catholics will be leading the new right. And the Protestants and the Baptists will have no say in it whatsoever. That's why I always advocate that white people that are Protestants and Baptists, Calvinistic, we don't hate anybody. We just want to separate to our own nation somewhere here in North America, as certain whites have done in South Africa, to separate to their own country. And I bid them well. I trust they bid me well. But we cannot be a part of this empire anymore. It's for our annihilation.
No, I think it's interesting because the new right is led in mass part by these very talented and well equipped orators and kind of thinkers. You have like the kind of Steve Bannons and the Jack Posobics who are, for instance, just out there in the front of the new right who are leading it, and they have sophisticated means by using the media to kind of propagate their ideas. And I was just watching this. No, go ahead, Eric.
Let me interrupt. Remember, the listener must always remember the Council for National Policy is the big intelligence group, financial group backing the new right. One of the members is Steve Bannon. He's Roman Catholic, Council for National Policy. Another one is Kellyanne Conway, Roman Catholic, Council for National Policy. The Council for National Policy continues to back Trump, and it's this coterie, this cabal, that was portrayed in the movie Conspiracy 13. I recommend the listeners watch that movie. Conspiracy, and Roman numerals X113, Conspiracy 13.
I'll write that down,
yeah. So that's what's really happening. And nobody, by the way, nobody's reporting on the Council for National Policy. You can't be talking about that now. They don't. You can't even get a record. Their list. I would love to have a record. I put it on my website, but you can't know that because this is the real secret power, and they interface with the Pope's Council on Foreign Relations in New York. So they all work together. We must never forget that. There is no them and us. This illusion of blacks versus whites and the alien invaders versus us. They brought those invaders in here to justify moving us to the new right. That's why they encourage them to commit all their crimes. But it's all the MS-13s works for the FBI.
No, it's remarkable to me that that they're now going to go through this just horrifying and laborious effort of trying to put the ICE department out there to take all these people out there that they let in, and it's going to become more and more. You can see the hype around it and the energy around these events, and obviously, like apparently Reddit and other agencies are leaking somehow. There's no telling how they're getting the information, but they're leaking the ICE raids so that they can have all these rioters out there, and they're going to make this as painful as possible. They haven't even got to the part where they're shooting these guys, right? They're just popping off the canisters of gas, right? But it's going to go on for months, and this is really just the beginning point of this new phase of this thing, I think.
That's correct. They have to do you look at the Black Lives Matter working in conjunction with the cops in Minnesota. So there was a stand down to the cops. They facilitated it. Somebody put big piles of bricks in there so they could throw bricks. It's all facilitated by the Jesuits controlling Freemasonry on the right and on the left, on the black, on the white, to then justify the end game, because the end game is what they want. More centralization of power, more militarization of the police, and more loss of rights for individuals. But they facilitated all together to this great end. And remember, Hitler outlawed guns, so did Joseph Stalin, and so they're going to try to pull the same thing here. That's another reason why we have to separate unto nationhood.
Yeah, I didn't get the feeling that any of Donald Trump's policies were like really favoring gun rights too much. Even his background and his lifestyle and the way that he lived in New York, and nothing. He's not like a big hunter. And apparently the story is that he almost got shot. So, I don't know how protected our gun rights will be. I just noticed this little YouTube video with Cardinal Vigano, who was supposed to be on the outs with the Vatican.
Oh, Vigano? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he's coming out with a video talking about the Jesuit order is a source of evil. And so I find that pretty interesting. I took a look at that.
Yeah, and we shall see what happens to him. Because the Jesuits are controlling the Pope, especially this American Pope. What a disgrace. Nothing will happen. If Pagano is an agent for the Jesuits, for the New Right, nothing will happen to him. Just like Alois Hudal, who was the bishop who orchestrated the removal of the high Nazi power of the SS and other officers out of Europe and had them going to Ireland, Canada, and America. That's Alois Hudal.
The Operation Paperclip? Yeah.
Paperclip and Spellman. You see, Spellman oversaw Paperclip.
Right.
So you got Hudal, you got Spellman, you got Pius XII. They're all working to the end of delivering their.
Well, so is Bergoglio. He was ultimately the Archbishop over Argentina. So he, as a young man and growing up, would have to obviously know about this and keep it a secret the whole time.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yep. Working with Juan Perón, I believe, and the other head of it was Opus Dei out of Chile, that Pinochet. Yeah, all Roman Catholic savage dictators persecuting the people of the country. Of course, most of the people are all Roman Catholics. So Roman Catholics cannot anticipate living under a free government. It's impossible.
So God forbid, but is that where you feel like this will lead to ultimately?
To what?
As far as the savagery of this kind of ultimate martial law dictatorship?
Of course.
That's a loaded question. I know you will say yes, but...
Remember, the Jesuit order, the great absolutists.
I haven't got a chance to hide my MAGA hat yet, but the point being that that Donald Trump is still all of our hopes are that everything will work out, that America will go through a golden age, a resurgence, and they will.
Just told the Germans we're going to have a 1,000-year Reich, and they had all their engineering and their architecture. And they were building the Autobahns and manufacturing the Volkswagen. All of that. It's exactly the same thing, which Trump has promised, that ends ultimately in war.
No, I mean, it's hard the real issue at hand is this massive debt. I mean, they added $22 trillion to what's like something like a $36 trillion president debt with this new bill. And so we're getting buried alive. And no one wants to talk about it. Like, we already are buried alive, actually. So we don't even see light anymore. Nobody really wants to discuss it. I think we're still kind of in a delusion that, we'll work our way out of it. We'll build our way. We'll build new, whatever. We're going to drive some kind of new AI weaponry or something. And so that's a real concern. I see that everyone thinks that they're going to have like this AI weaponry advantage. And I'm not sure I see how that's going to work out.
No. And furthermore, the money issue has been done. Jesuit Biden flooded the country with all this extra credit. All this debt is credit, credit is debt, to the end game that they would be able to justify the imposition of the new monetary system or new money, or to begin to back the dollar with gold. And this is what Hitler did. The German mark was worthless after World War I. Germany went into a Great Depression. And you have the end of the Weimar Republic. You have really the beginning of the end of Protestant Prussia. And what did they do? Why, they backed the mark with gold. So that made the mark competitive. They began to build the economic system. I think Trump, if he's going to follow the pattern of Weimar Germany, the republic there, he's going to back the currency with gold and probably undo the executive, the proclamation of Richard Nixon in 1971 when he took the country off the gold standard. He's got to do something. He's got to stabilize the currency one way or another to be able to finance and have commerce continue if we're going to have a two-front war, one in the Far East with China, the other in the Near East and with the Arab nations, and Iran specifically, against Shia Iran.
Yeah, no, I think that according to your model, they can't have Shia Islam because it's an unnatural offshoot of ForgottenBooks.com. Guys, you guys have to check out ForgottenBooks.com. It's just a really wonderful outlet. Forgotten Books is a London-based book publisher specializing in the restoration of old books, both fiction and nonfiction manuscripts that are hard to find, almost forgotten and lost to modernity, right? So we have some really incredible books here on ForgottenBooks.com. And as we look through, I'm just looking through some of the headlines here, and it's incredible. Like I can see here that a lot of Helena Petrovna Blavatsky's books are here. So I could see studies by Malachi Taylor on Ephesians. Fascinating. I can see here an essay on church government by an unknown author, right? As I go through here, over 1.3 million forgotten or lost or all but lost books, right? The history of the so-called Jansenist Church of Holland, the moral concordances of St. Anthony of Padua, right? All this incredible books, guys. All these incredible forgotten books. A sermon on the death of Abraham Lincoln, right? This is incredible. This is an incredible resource. The secret instructions of the Jesuits, right? All these. ISIS Unveiled. Wow, this is incredible. ISIS Unveiled right here on ForgottenBooks.com. Guys, you got to come check it out. So no, I think that I have a lot of. I was on Twitter, it's funny to have to say all these strange names, but I'm on Twitter and I'm over here with this AI program Grok, and I'm arguing with AI about the root creation of Islam, like where it all began. And AI is pretty smart. AI has a lot of facts, right? And it's interesting because it ultimately is denying my perspective and trying to convince me that it's wrong. But the more details that it produces in relation to the issue, the more kind of ammunition it gives me that I didn't even know, So It's very interesting how our perspective of obviously the Augustinian order wasn't created yet until the later the 14 and 1500s, but the influence of Augustine would be in place since like the 4th century. So
the Augustine were in North Africa.
Yeah,
they were in North, brother, and the Augustinians were there hosting Muhammad in the 700s.
Well, the Augustinian order officially wasn't created until the 1500s or the 1400s, I think. But the agency of Augustine was, because you have to argue with Grok, so you have to get all your exact details. So
Augustine is one of the forefathers of the Roman Catholic institution.
Yeah, he died in 500, I believe, if I remember. So his influence was, that's why I had to go break it all down for Grok. I had to explain to Grok that the influence of Augustine in the area was tremendous. I even had some articles that I uploaded to show that during his burial, at the time when he died, when they went and did his burial and did his funeral, it was like explosive all across North Africa. Like his influence and his theological perspective are deeply ingrained in the Quran and in the surahs and the hadiths, especially when the Muslim writers are complaining about the Trinity. And of course the Trinity was one of the main things that St. Augustine was really fascinated by and discussed and went to great lengths to make a treatise about before Islam. So this idea of the Trinity, whatever your opinion of it is, was like the forefront of Christian theology at the time that Islam is born, So of course that makes its appearance within the Quran and the surahs and the hadith, etc. So yeah, it's a fascinating discussion, and we have a lot more work to do to kind of flesh that out.
Well, Calvin was a great quoter of Augustine. And no doubt Augustine said many truthful things, because when I read Calvin's Institutes, when he's quoting him, what he's quoting on Augustine is biblical, it's true. However, Augustine was used by Satan as one of the 4 church fathers of the papacy, justifying what they stand for. And there's no question that in North Africa, you have the Roman Catholic priests there that were busy working with Muhammad, and his wife, one of his wives, was a nun undercover.
Khadijah.
And,
right.
Yeah, right. And so that Islam, Sunni Islam, would be an arm of the church to kill Bible-believing Jews, Jewish Christians, and Bible-believing Arab Christians. So it was the long arm of the church, of the papacy, until when Islam took Jerusalem. Then, because the Pope had backed the Jihads and the wars of Islam when they took Jerusalem, then the Muslims told him that you can't have it and called the Pope a heretic. And so you have the severing of Islam from papal control until around the 1300s, 1400s, thereabout. So, but it was an arm of the papacy for a long time. And today, really since creation of Wahhabism in the 1700s, and Richard Burton is the first white man to go to Mecca in the 1800s, and he's a high-level Freemason. You have Islamic Freemasons that are Wahhabis and Sunnis working with the papacy, subject to the Jesuits, to build their second Sunni caliphate. And you can't have a second Sunni caliphate as long as you have powerful and influential and wealthy Shia Islam centered in Iran.
So it's the schism in Islam that they have to get rid of to unify.
Yes, they have to get rid of that schism, just like they have to get rid of the Protestant schism of quote-unquote Christianity. It's the same exact deal. So we're going to get rid of the Shia. We're going to have a big war there. That's why we have two carrier groups over there. We got American soldiers going into Israel now. They're bringing in all the hardware. We got an American base in Israel that Barry Chambers reported on, 20 years ago. So there's going to be a huge Middle Eastern war with a huge American effect. And as I've always said, when those mosques are brought down, Dome of the Rock, Al-Aqsa Mosque are brought down in Jerusalem, America will be blamed for it. And this will incite Islam to hate and kill every American they can find. Yep.
No, God forbid that, but we have to recognize that based on how they try to bury and create coverts to hide the past and to make it difficult to kind of learn the truth, it's the same thing going forward in time. You can see that these kind of patterns repeat in history, so it makes me suspicious of what will happen next and how this will play out. And I know something has to give, and it was strange to me how I know that we can't trust these individuals in Washington, D.C., these politicians, and the entire game has been to control the Oval Office, right, through one means or another.
You have to always remember that this is a military government. The emergency war powers military government. It's not my government. It should be your government. Your government was a civilian government that was temporarily ousted on March 9th, 1933, and it's been ousted for 92 years. We have no representation as private citizens, pre-March 9th, 1933 private citizens. They only govern enemy belligerents, individuals, partnerships, associations, corporations. Everything is seized by the commander-in-chief, and he's controlled by the Pope of Rome, no matter if it's Democrat or Republican. So, no, this is what the government does to us. It's a ceaseless, constant war, enemy belligerents from every facet, whether it's medical or legal or historical or military. It's a ceaseless war against us because it's following the tenets of the Counter-Reformation of the Jesuits as they run this military government in the District of Columbia.
Yeah, that was going to the motive of the whole purpose of they desperately need to bring about an end calamity, an end annihilation point for this country. And it's all about like shaping history. And we know that America was ultimately in its inspiration, at its beginning point, was the Protestant, Baptist, and Lutheran ideals were brought to bear to bring about this free nation. And of course, democracy is something that was antithetical to everything Roman and Roman religion and the Roman papacy. So the idea that we could have our own nation, it goes back to, like you said, the Westphalian, kind of the Peace of Westphalia, where...
Well, the Peace of Westphalia, which was German, and you have the Peace of Munster, the Treaty of Munster, which was Dutch, that took place in the Netherlands. And so the 30 Years' War in Germany and the 80-year Civil War in the Netherlands ended in 1648 with those two treaties. So Goebbels said this war has rearranged the boundaries that were set forth in the Treaty of Westphalia.
Right.
It was a Protestant result of the Protestants taking up the sword of just defense. So they ended.
And ultimately, they established the right to have free nations of their own that were outside of the dominion of the kings and princes of Christendom.
Established nationalism. Nationalism is Genesis 10. A people with a specific race, language, and culture with a geographic boundary, that is a nation. And so to corrupt that, we have to race mix it, miscegenate it. We have to extend the boundaries into other countries, justify war, They hate nationalism because nationalism was born out of the Reformation and the Treaty of Westphalia, because that's practically the end of the Holy Roman Empire. Even though it formally ended in 1808 with Napoleon, you have the breakup of the Northern European white Protestant nations. And so the Pope was furious about this, and all the wars have been facilitated to bring that back. Restoration of feudalism, destruction of the middle class, imposition of socialist communism everywhere.
So, as we go forward, what do you think about this new Pope? I mean, I guess he'll be more of a technical, scholarly guy. I mean, he doesn't seem as much like a Marxist revolutionary as the last guy. I'm not sure what I'm looking at there. I'm not really sure how, the Bergoglio, he went out of view pretty fast. And I guess he got his reward in this life for the work he did. And so he got his reward, and then now they're on to this new guy. I guess it's all about Chicago right now. I see Chicago's got this mass Muslim prayer call where they're going to fill up the football field full of Muslims to pray on the field. They're going to resist the federal government to take any illegal immigrants out. So it's going to be like a center city of this new revolt. So God help any illegal citizens in there that have to survive in that kind of gauntlet.
Yeah, the illegal invaders, lots of Muslims came across the border for this very purpose, to then incite them to savagery and rioting. And
it's kind of surreal, Eric. It's very surreal because you were talking about this for quite some time, and now it's really happened, and it's a very strange and kind of off-putting position to be in to discuss it, because there was a before and after. It's very shocking to be here now to see this is going to happen. So
that's right, but we have to be cool about it and remember this is exactly what the Jesuits want, because with all the Muslim and Hispanic Roman Catholic savagery they're going to unleash in the major cities that are primarily Roman Catholic and black, they will then be able to justify the imposition of martial law, round them all up, and send them to the camps, or bring out the guillotines, because there's over 100,000 mobile guillotines in storage on the army bases. Bring them out and start rounding them up, beheading them, throw them in their big black coffins that they have in storage, and send them off to some reprocessing plant like in Indiana. So they're going to do this.
So they're going to liquidate ultimately, if you think about it, the individuals who have Social Security numbers are really liable for the debt, the massive debt burden that we're supposed to be paying back. I guess it's the 36 plus the 22 trillion now that the American citizenry, I guess, no longer private now, very publicans, if you want, are going to have to pay this back. And a lot of people that are here running around causing all this trouble and burning and looting don't have any accountability or personal technical responsibility for this debt, and they don't have the documents or the technotronic enslavement to this system of debt creation like we do. It's like we have individuals with these documents are basically like cattle with tags in our ears, and we owe this. We're responsible and we're accountable to pay it back. It's a national debt. This is a massive national debt that's ballooning. And so I don't know. I don't think people comprehend it. I don't think people realize that's really what the nature of the game is to get us to where we're basically totally bankrupt as a nation.
Well, we've been bankrupt, brother, since June of 6, 1933, when FDR signed into the law House Joint Resolution 192, which is now codified as 31 U.S.C. 5111, like that. So we've been bankrupt since 1933 because, as J.P. Morgan said, only gold is money and everything else is credit. And when you remove gold from circulation, then all you have is credit, and thus you have bankruptcy. But that's the military government that's bankrupt, not the civilian government. So the military government is bankrupt, and because of this bankruptcy, it's now in receivership since 1933. And guess who's the receiver? Why, it's the Secretary of Treasury. And that's how you have the alignment with the world, with all the big international banks and so on, because of that. So I'm not concerned at all about the national debt. If I was the president, I'd repudiate it right now, gone, with a flick of an eye, and then we're going to have our currency back with gold, and we're going to do that. And all the big boys that want to crash the place, I would arrest them for high treason and find them guilty and take them out and shoot them. I'm not going to tolerate any Knights of Malta, any of the papal secret societies ruining our economy anymore. You want to do that, and you obviously are at war with me, and I'll be at war with you. And so may the best man win, may the righteous side win. But to think that we can work with these people is insane. Look what they did in 2008, and they want to do the same thing again. So we have to wake up to the fact that the papacy is the great international globalist, quote unquote, brotherhood that is determined, hell-bent to destroy historic white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Calvinist Western civilization.
No, I think every single excuse and philosophy there is to create this international order, whether it's environmentalism or the United Nations or communism or any kind of like intellectually generated thesis that brings us to this final global government, is ultimately Jesuitical. It's ultimately the papal plan to restore its universal power that it lost, that it had, I guess, during the Dark Ages, which was just universal power over the face of the earth. And we have to kind of we have to get to this place because it's scriptural, it's prophetic.
Correct.
The Antichrist is driven by that.
And if we're going to resist it like we're supposed to, Hebrews 12:4, the apostle rebukes the Hebrew believers, saying, "You have not resisted unto blood, striving against sin." And this is what the Puritans did. They resisted in 1,000 battles unto blood, striving against the sin of the tyranny of the kings of Europe, backed by the Pope of Rome. That's how you understand the Puritans. This is why they're so hated by the papacy and the culture in general and all the communist academics. So until we realize that we first repent, we believe the gospel, we return to the Reformation Bible, and then take up the sword of just defense, then will the Lord bless us. But there is no successful resistance to the political tyranny, the temporal power of the Pope, unless there's true repentance and belief in Christ, and then following the examples of our forefathers to resist it unto blood.
No, I think that resisting and refusing to participate in sin is kind of a negative power, and it doesn't violate anyone else's rights or freedoms or lives, because unless you cross those individuals and try to force them to do things that they don't want to do, ultimately those, if you're just taking it upon yourself to defend, ultimately there's no problem unless there's an attacker. So that's an important point of view, that we have the right to our lives and our liberty, and the Constitution. It's like it goes a good ways to enshrine that and point that out. But those are facts of life that exist, even if the Constitution is burned or if people can't remember what it says. We still have the right, our God-given right, to our lives and our liberty and our pursuit of the life that we want. And I think that's crucial to remember that as we go forward. And I think that it is the work of the Counter-Reformation to deteriorate this nation. And you can see it's working out very well. I think that the actual the nuclear family and the structure of society since the 1930s and 1940s is so deteriorated and so corrupted and perverse that I don't see how we survive as a nation. I worry about that because God has to punish sin, and He has to make an example, as He always has and always will do. So I guess if we don't make an effort to repent as a nation, I don't know how we get to carry on with the pride of this flag and the pride of the heritage of the founders and the great the benefit and wealth of the constitutional heritage that we have. I guess we don't deserve it if we're not willing to walk, like the Lord requires us to do so.
That's right. Exactly right. So it's a spiritual problem, first of all. And then once that's addressed, people truly repent and return to the Reformation, start to denounce sin, and ultimately denounce the papacy and their secret societies, specifically the Jesuits. Nothing is going to change.
I think that in this country we have this pervasive Christianity, I guess churchianity, and they're really mixed up because they have this mixture of New Age ideas with kind of childish papal ceremonies and rituals during with the winter solstice, etc. And they, just this kind of continuation of the infantile notions with Santa Claus and all this. It kind of has crept in like a pathogen, just a little bit of leaven. Leaven's the whole lump, if you want.
Right. Leaven's the whole lump. That's right.
So that's kind of what you're dealing with in this church nowadays, and you have a lot of emotionalism, a lot of a kind of ecstatics that people are practicing, but the power of the Holy Spirit, like as far as the New Testament, is just not there. We don't see it present. We don't see the same working of the outpouring of the Holy Spirit that was, there was evidence then is not happening now. So I'm not sure what these people are doing, but America seems like it's in a terrible condition as a church.
We have not had a great awakening or a revival in this country since in 1933, when they imposed the emergency war powers military government, and they took all Americans and they clothed them with an artificial person, an ens legis, the all caps entity, enemy belligerent. And when that happened, there has been no revival and no great awakening.
Now, I've heard you discuss this before, and you go into this idea in Scripture that it is a sin to become, what would you say is surety for a bond, a surety for another man. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, Proverbs 11:15. Whosoever is surety for a stranger, that's this all caps entity, this legal fiction. Whosoever is surety for this stranger shall smart for it, shall hurt because of it. But whosoever hateth suretyship with a stranger shall be sure, shall be safe. So we should not at all be surety for this all caps entity. But you cannot establish a bank account, a personal bank account, without being surety for the all caps entity. You cannot go in the military without being surety for the all caps entity. You cannot you can't do anything without being surety for this all caps entity. And that's how the military government rules we the people. We've lost our status. We're clothed with an artificial person. We consented to it, and now we've hurt for it. We've hurt terribly since the last 92 years have passed. So I teach in my class to reverse it.
Yeah.
And the end game being to separate, starting with either your county or your state, to a new sovereign nation that we as freemen, that real men, real women, that are not clothed with this artificial person, can have our own nation, grow our own food, have our own technology, preach the gospel, and wish other nations well, but we will defend ourselves.
Yeah, no, that's another point of curiosity to me. Like, I'm really curious about this early point in papal history where the papacy is trying to grow in its geopolitical power and become a principality in its own right. It's taken on this title of Pontifex Maximus, which was the old kind of Babylonian priestcraft black magic title that came on to Rome that Julius Caesar took up. And just following that trajectory right there, you can see that early on they supported Islam and they funded. And this history is hard to find now, especially with AI, especially with this new Google apparatus. It just works to bury this whole topic in layers of counter pseudo history, right? So, but we're trying to find this early point where the papacy is supporting Islam, driving the jihads forward, and they love it. Like, they even love it. They even are supporting Islam to take the Jerusalem, right? And so that's a long time that the papacy. I don't know how many popes have to go back and do the full research and really uncover it, but it's the same point in history that I find interesting with the Third Reich, who had a lot to say about the Confederacy, which I was like, what is this all about? So I'm going to look, and apparently the Third Reich took some of the things that the Confederacy did really to heart, and they really wanted to model some of the their ideas after that, and so they even their uniforms and all kinds of stuff, So I think that's weird that the same force historically, all the men associated would have passed away, but the same military force in the background is still operating in both cases. So I think that it's interesting that they split Virginia into North and South. They split Germany into pieces. You know what I mean? So and ultimately, what happened during the Civil War, despite all the different movies and bizarre historical analysis, you can see that America lost its status as a free nation and as countries who were nations. They lost their sovereignty as nation states, and they were subsumed into a larger supranational government, which was the American national government. So that's what the outcome of the Civil War was.
That's correct. The purpose of the war between the states, because it was not a civil war, the South had lawfully and rightly seceded, as they reserve that right to do, as we talked before.
Because they were free nations, just like America could leave the World Trade Organization, and they can't say you can't, right? They were sovereign nations. We didn't like slavery, we didn't like things they did, but they had the right to just maintain their.
Hold it. You show me anywhere in the Bible that condemns the institution of slavery. I will show you several places where it tells how the master is to treat the slave. I don't see any condemnation of slavery by the Lord Jesus Christ. So slavery was not America's first sin. The issue was that when the Jesuits want to divide this country, as Andrew Jackson said, first it was the tariff, and now they're going to divide this country over the burning question of slavery. And so
well, I think that in a larger geopolitical sense.
But let me finish.
Go ahead.
So what happens is they're going to the war between the states. The southern states withdrew from the Union because of the centralization of power and the persecution of the southern states. And so they were fighting centralization of power. But when you have Gettysburg and the Emancipation Proclamation, which is a communist doctrine, but written by radical red Republicans, when you have that, now it becomes, rather than a war of resisting centralization of power, it becomes a war on the part of Yankee North to free the slaves. And so it's a crusade. And I maintain America's greatest military historian is Bevan Alexander. He's written several great works. One of them is Lost Victories, to show how Robert E. Lee, the traitor, refused to allow Stonewall Jackson to win that war on 4 separate occasions. And then, as I recently learned, Robert E. Lee would not allow John Bell Hood to properly attack Little Round Top at Gettysburg, which Hood said, "We can take this with my Texans," and Lee refused to allow him to do that, along with Longstreet. And this is on a letter that has been discovered recently, written in 1876 or something by John Bell Hood, and he explains everything that happened in Gettysburg and how that was deliberately lost. He was not allowed to take Little Round Top. So the Jesuits, in controlling Lee, made sure the South lost, and then with that, you're going to have the creation of a national government, replacing a federal government, and the national government that would then be ousted temporarily in 1933 with the military, military.
Even the nation states in the North who had won still lost their sovereignty and subsumed into this larger national, single national government. They were now just states, almost like counties, right? They're just smaller.
That's right. First step was from federal government to national government. Federal citizenship was made national for both blacks and whites. And then with a national citizenship and a national government, we're going to implement the District of Columbia Act in 1871. It will be repealed in 1874. It will be brought back in 1878. So now we have our Rome on the Potomac.
This is the sovereignty. This is now the new military government sovereignty in the nation that is really the center of the empire. And all the other nations, whether it was Georgia or East and West Virginia, I guess, and Pennsylvania, all these proud once sovereign nations are now subsumed under the empire of D.C., right? Empire of Washington, D.C. Okay.
They're conquered territories because everybody living in the states now is an enemy or person under Trading with the Enemy Act, Emergency Banking Relief Act. And since all U.S. citizens, quote unquote, are enemy belligerents, property follows the status of the owner. And so therefore the property they live on is enemy property. And so therefore it's enemy property under Trading with the Enemy Act, or Title 50. And so that's how the Commander-in-Chief treats everybody in this country as an enemy belligerent to be conquered and subjugated and to be used for the purpose of fighting the Crusades.
And to be numbered and identified and numbered and tagged and get a custom number on your birth certificate and your death certificate, etc. Right, you're documented.
Registered property. Right. Your registered property to be used by your owner, the Commander-in-Chief. So now, since we have this, who is your owner? Is Jesus Christ your owner if you're saved? No, he's not your owner if you're a U.S. citizen and you're surety for this all-caps entity. So if that's what you want, then the Lord backs off. I'm not going to send any great awakenings. You can figure it out for yourself. But it's out there so people can know it, so they can ultimately stop it and be free individuals under God with true pre-1933 private citizenship and returning to the King James Bible, or the Reformation Bible. That's the solution. Now, as long as you're doing this, it's not going to change.
As I would returning to the issue of slavery, it reminds me that in the Bible that The Passover was the great releasing of the slaves out of Egypt who were terribly treated and who were basically enslaved permanently with no release or no recourse as a permanent slave class for 400 something years. So God, and of course, Pharaoh is an emblem of the picture of Antichrist in the future. He's a type and shadow, an archetype of Antichrist. So the Jews are going to be released. They're going to come back, return to their land. Regarding slavery as an institution worldwide, the idea had never been challenged. It had been supported by the Roman papacy for some 1800 years in all kinds of documents, which I can show. And the papacy gave all the slaves or brown-skinned people in the New World on one side of a dividing line to the King of Spain and the other to the King of Portugal, and declared all the people there who were heathens and heretics, and they could be burned or they could be disposed of any kind of way. So there was So the first movement of this idea that we should have kind of abolition is going to come out of England with William Wilberforce and some of these Quakers and Puritans they're really sensitive to the idea of how the people are being treated. They're really like highly cultured, highly class people, really aristocratic, and no one likes to see people treated that way. And so I think that you can see that the King George III used the black populace and tried to create an unrest during the Revolutionary War. And then ultimately they tried to shove them into America and try to force those populations on us. You can also see that it was a major issue during the creation of the Constitution when there was the 3/5 compromise, where it really should have been settled then, but this really sets up the Civil War. So you can see that France and England had engaged in slavery forever, right? But early on, like in the century, like I think it's going to be right around 1804 for France, and I think 1819 for England, 1820, when suddenly they're going to do away with slavery. And so the big issue is American slavery is now is now the big burning moral issue of the day. So that's really what is really happening. It's being framed in this geopolitical way. It's almost like a symphony of nations, if you want, like where everyone is preparing to frame this issue. Yeah.
It was a communist agitation. The radical red Republicans in the North didn't give two hoots about the blacks in the South.
Neither did the King of France or the government in France. Or whatever.
Brother, let me finish. If they would have been concerned about the blacks in the South after they liberated them with Juneteenth or whatever, they would have said, okay, now we're going to give you some land. Martin Luther King was right. They never gave us any land. So we're going to give you some land so you can have your own country and you can be self-governing. But oh no, what we're going to do is we're going to abandon you to the South. You can be under Jim Crow, and you're not going to have masters that are going to care for you anymore. You're going to be under Jim Crow and a horrible, terrible system down there that will ultimately justify the civil rights movement, the socialist, communist civil rights movement, to then ultimately be used to further destroy the whites and thus further destroy the Reformation. And that's how they've been used. They couldn't care less about the black man, and that was the message of Malcolm X. That's why he said the Northern Democrats, the Northern Liberal, is the most vicious, evil enemy that we as black people have in North America. And he was absolutely right.
No, I think it was obviously arranged. The way that Lincoln was killed, the Jesuits were controlling Washington, D.C. It was Rome on the Potomac. It was the farm of one of the signers, Carroll, John Carroll, one of the early Jesuits, and wasn't he a signer of the? So he was.
Charles Carroll, not John Carroll.
I'm sorry. Say it one more time, Eric.
Charles Carroll was a signer of the Constitution, the only Roman Catholic who signed it, and John Carroll was the head of Georgetown College.
So Charles may have not been a Jesuit, but John was probably.
Well, Charles was definitely not working for him, otherwise he wouldn't have signed the Constitution. But John Carroll most surely was. So they considered this a temporary setback.
You don't think that they would have someone in there and sign the Constitution just to kind of, on a level of subterfuge, to be deeply embedded in the revolution or anything like that? There's a lot of different theories about that.
Well, I'll tell you this. The Pope called the Constitution a document of Satan. And if the Jesuits would have had their way, that would have never worked because the Jesuits had King George III in the palm of their hand. And so, by the sovereignty and providence of God, France, that had expelled the Jesuits in 1764, came in on our side. And without the French army and without the French navy, we would have been beaten by the British, the greatest army, the greatest navy in the world.
Yeah, or the Russian gunboats on our coast too. Don't leave them out.
That's during the war between the states. That's not the war of the talking the Revolutionary War.
Yes, sir.
And so the Jesuits made sure that they're going to use the Russian gunboats to cut off trade, and that was Alexander II, who was later assassinated by the radical anarchists when his legs were blown off in his coach. When Alexander II began to resist the Jesuit order. That's what they've done here. And so we're much better, much worse off after the civil rights movement, after the socialist communism than before. And we're much worse off after the war between the states than before. And we can never forget that we had the policy, the American Colonization Society, that you can read about in History of Slavery and History of Slave Trade and Slavery by W. O. Blake, 1,000 pages, tells you that there was a gradual emancipation and repatriation to the beautiful black nation of Liberia that was purchased by white Protestants for the American blacks that were freed to go to Africa and have their own sovereign nation state. That's what was happening. And the Jesuits could not allow that to continue. They had to have a radical emancipation. So they had to have a radical black emancipation, so they will use their
bloodshed. When you say radical, they need bloodshed. We need catastrophe.
We need a radical emancipation of the blacks. You're going to throw the blacks out of the control of their masters, out of protection of their masters, so they have no protection, and that will justify the wicked Thaddeus Stevens, who was under the advice of the Jesuits with his black Roman Catholic concubine. We're going to have this Thaddeus Stevens there with the Freedmen's Bureau. And the Freedmen's Bureau is so sheer socialist communism. Now we have to educate the blacks. Now we have to this and that. Hey, that's not the purpose of government. So it's one iniquity after iniquity against the white Protestant Southern people. And then after the war between the states, we're going to conquer them, and we'll use Southern Masonic traitors to get the whites of the South to fight for the Yankee Union government. Disgrace.
No, they did a lot. It was a massive, like I said, it was an orchestration of nations because they had they had the second potato famine, like we were just discussing, where they brought all these Irish Catholics over here to be poured into Lincoln's army. So I wonder, how much do you think Lincoln was aware of this? I mean, I guess
he was very much aware of it. Chinnicky tells what Lincoln was aware of in his 50 years in the Church of Rome. And he talks about it. The Protestants knew what was being done by the Jesuits here, bringing in all their priests and nuns and Irish immigrants, quote unquote. There would be a bloody, holy war 1,000 times bloodier than the Civil War that's been just fought. So that's why Lincoln suppressed that. That's why his son Robert Lincoln burned all of his private letters, because it could not become public that this was a Jesuit papal design of fomenting this horrible, terrible war between the states, resulting in the death of over 700,000 people, soldiers and people, to the end then that the Jesuits would control it out of Washington. They knew that. There would have been a holy war in the South.
I think it's interesting. Our hour with you is almost wrapped up here, but I wanted to point out that I just recently was reading these old copies of Minerva magazine, and Minerva magazine was apparently an old magazine that Illuminists and Illuminati agents would read and were involved with, especially Hegel, the philosopher Hegel. And so out of these German universities, when I started reading this magazine, I started to realize that Haiti and the revolt that happened in Haiti, which was a total slave revolt that ended up with the death of every single white person on the island.
Yeah, they killed all the white Catholics.
Right.
And the only guy who saved the day was Loboucher, and he was a black Freemason, and he put an end to that. But because Loboucher stopped the savagery, Napoleon brought him back to France and put him in prison. There he died.
Yeah, the Code Noir. So the black code of black slavery was broken, but they ultimately brought it back. So it was weird because it's from my reading of this Minerva magazine, apparently these intellectuals and these scholastics up there in these German universities in Ingolstadt or whatever had a lot to do with pulling the strings to make sure that that revolt happened. And I'm trying to understand how that works. Like what were the mechanics of how that would work? You're up in Germany. You're an illuminist. You're a Jesuit. Provocateur and agent, and somehow your writings and your work in these magazines, for instance, are going to help provoke the overthrow of all the white slave masters on the island. So that's the kind of work that they were doing. It's intriguing.
Yeah, you have agent provocateurs that lead that. There were black agent provocateurs that did that, knowing that when you destroy the white population that's farming and running a civilization, you ultimately destroy the blacks who destroy the whites. Exactly as what's been done in Rhodesia or Zimbabwe. That's why they're starving to death, because they killed off all the white farmers. So they pulled the same thing in Hispaniola. That's what it was.
So this kind of Marxist dialectical provocation that causes these uninformed black people to kill all the whites and drive them off and then starve themselves just leaves all the mineral rights in the mountains like wide open to De Beers or whatever, right? That's the grand plan.
Exactly right. Or it opens them up to a future invasion. Don't you think China enjoys all the black on white crime?
Right.
They love it. They like seeing the destruction of culture in the society because it's going to be that much easier for their armies to conquer the major cities.
Yeah, well, they already know who the superior race is. And it's not us.
Of course they do. Of course they do. Well, without the white race, you don't have any engineering or bridges or any of this in the world.
Well, from their point of view, if you're in the CCP, you think you're the superior race and you're the racist.
It's so ridiculous because all the technology they have came from us.
But they're apparently robbing us blind, and we're giving it away for tranches of like greenbacks.
Let's be clear: we're not giving it away.
No.
The military government in Washington,
but just guys who look like us, like Bill Clinton, etc. They just look. They all look the same, like us. So we must be us. We must be idiots.
So one of the important things we as white people have to stress is that the greatest men in the world are white. The worst men in the world are white. So you have to decide which side you're going to be on. And it's the same way with the blacks. The blacks need to stop condemning all white people in general, and they got to decide which white people we're going to help and which white people we're going to resist.
No, I think you're definitely right. Well, I appreciate your time spent with us again, and it's definitely been very edifying, and I hope that people will come to support your work over there at Vatican Assassins and 24/7 World Radio, and I hope we keep this dialogue up. I really appreciate your time, sir.
Well, I appreciate your time, John, and I appreciate your statements and questions, give me the opportunity to reply. And I appreciate your listeners that are tuning in and listening to it and giving it serious consideration.